Jim Peters with Lowell Remembers. I'm supposed to have Sean Thibodeau with me today from the Lowell Public Library, but John is not available. So we're going to do this one solo. What we're going to talk about today is the Irish Catholic Introduction to Lowell, and I'm using as sources. I'm using the book History of Lowell, which was written in 1893 and contains just about everything you'd want to know about Lowell. The Irish Catholic Genesis of Lowell, and the book From Erin to the Acre, which is right here, which is a very good book by David McKean. And David is active with St. Patrick's Church and is a marvelous person who gives us time to run tours of St. Patrick's to people who want to take a tour of it. Anyway, in 1822, Hugh Comiskey got together with 30 Irish laborers, and they walked the 20 miles from Boston to Lowell to see if they could get work. And when they got here, they met with Kirk Boot, and Kirk Boot showed them what he wanted to have done in terms of canals. And what you got to keep in mind about what they wanted to have done in terms of canals is that they did not have dynamite at that time, and they had to use gunpowder. And a lot of people lost their lives with gunpowder because gunpowder simply required a spark, which would often come from the metal hitting the stone, and the spark would cause an explosion and kill the person trying to start the charge. So they had to dig out granite for miles along the canal routes, and the canals had to be a certain depth and a certain length, width, and their length was determined by the needs of the locks and canals owners, and that was part of what the Irish had to deal with. There were 30 of them. Most were living in Lowell, and a lot of them died in Lowell, and they were the first Irish to come to Lowell and be counted. Hugh Comiskey was an immigrant from County Tyrone in Ireland, and he joined up with a priest, Father O'Brien, and he decided, well, Kirk Boot actually decided that it would be a good idea to give the Irish a church, because Kirk Boot was a strong believer in churches, and he believed that the Irish would work better if they had a church to go to on Sunday. So he decided that he would maintain the church and have the Irish build their own church. And the first Irish building was a wooden building built in 1822 or so. It was called St. Patrick's Church. It stands on the site of where St. Patrick's Church is now. And in front of the church are the burial sites of the first 4 priests who were in the Irish Catholic St. Patrick's Church area. The acre was basically an acre of land, not a little bit more than that, but about an acre of land that was given to the Irish, and they built sheds on it. Now, it would be hard to call them houses. They were made of whatever wood they could find, and they were constructed with holes in the roof to let the smoke out from the fire, or chimneys made out of mud and grass. And the chimneys worked better than the fire did in the middle. I mean, there wasn't as much smoke. So the chimneys worked a little better than the fires did in the middle of the house. But the houses were about 7 feet by 10 feet. And they lived in what we would now consider to be extreme camping weather. The laborers were not meant to become part of Lowell's permanent workforce, but they became part of Lowell's permanent workforce because there was a lot of work to do. And they had to dig all the canals. And they had to do it with gunpowder. And as I said, gunpowder was extremely dangerous. Just a spark would kill the person who was trying to put the gunpowder in and pack it down. The Irish, a lot of the Irish died as a result of this type of canal work. And they wanted, over time, to do something different. And at some point, they actually got a chance to do something a little bit different, but that would come later in Irish history. Paddy Camps dotted the acre. Paddy Camps were what they called the camp. Well, it really was a camp for each Irish house. And each Irish house, as I said, was about 7 by 10 feet, and had a mud chimney on it. The chimneys were well, I said this before, but the chimneys were sometimes holes in the ceilings and the roofs. The Irish were expected to go back to Boston when work ran out, but they wanted to work in Lowell. And so they were trying to find ways of getting menial jobs to do. Eventually, the Irish sent for their wives and children, and eventually we had an Irish settlement. But the first 30 Irishmen were Irishmen, not Irish women, and not Irish children. And the first 30 were the ones who started the Great Lowell Experiment in Irish settlement. John Kennedy made the point that 4 million people came over from Ireland over the course of the 1800s, and he contributed that to the Irish being willing to work in menial jobs. So the Irish women, when they came over, did sewing and cloth making, not the type that happened in the textile mills, but cloth making of their own. And they were the ones who were given the checkbook every Friday. It really wasn't a checkbook, it was a bit of money. They were given all the money that the Irishmen made in their camps. And there were the 30 men, when their wives came over, started to give all their money to their wives, and the wives were responsible for paying for the children's education, which was supplied by the church, but which cost money. And the education, the food, the nicer accoutrements, but they really weren't too nice. They were corncob beds and that type of thing. So the Irishmen began farming in their own community, not in the city proper where the corporations' boarding houses dotted the landscape, but on the opposite side in the Western Canal, which were called the Paddy Camps. Now, if you want to read a really good book, read the Paddy Camps. It's available at the National Park Service. Talks a lot about the Irish settlement in Lowell and what the Irish did. Cabins were made of, as I said, of whatever wood was available. And the Irish were expected to go back to Boston when work ran out, but they didn't want to. And they stayed here looking for jobs to do. In 1822, Hugh Comiskey gathered the men to drill the holes in the granite and make it into canals. And many Irish lost their lives, as I said, when the contact between the stone and metal caused a spark. They cleared the granite out of all the canals. And the worker statue is made in their honor. The worker statue stands outside the LTC, which is the old Suffolk Mills. And you can see the worker statue outside the LTC on any given day. It's well worth the viewing, as are the statues to the Irish, to the woman who worked in the mills down in front of the Suffolk Mills. So the Paddy Camp's book is full of interesting history. One thing they didn't have at first was religious training. The Irish introduction to Lowell was so great that the school system, the school system at the time, wanted the Irish to become part of the public school system. So they made what they called District 7, which was for Irish. But what they didn't take into account was that they were Anglican or Episcopalian, and the Irish were Catholic, and the Irish didn't want to have anything to do with Episcopalians. So the Irish mothers, when they were given that money every week, paid for school for their children for the week, and that's how the whole system worked at first. One thing they didn't have at first, well, it was religious training. Father John O'Brien saved the day by becoming their priest. Now, John O'Brien was the first of a group of related individuals who became priests of St. Patrick's Church. There was William. In fact, let me look this up because it's kind of important. There was John, there was Timothy, there was Michael, and there was William. And William died in 1922 and was buried with his great uncles in front of St. Patrick's Church. And at first they had a huge tombstone there, but now they just have a little grave marker built into the sidewalk. Mr. Comiskey took time from Kirk Boot, as I said, who needed their workers to make the canals, and Hugh Comiskey and Father O'Brien led the charge. The former Hugh Comiskey acted as an enabler and got the town to patrol the village with policemen. O'Brien asked the Sisters of Notre Dame to form a school for the girls. And so the Sisters of Notre Dame formed a school for the girls next to St. Patrick's Church, next to St. Patrick's Church. And as the community grew until, according to the Irish Catholic Genesis of Lowell, in about 1833, there was a group of know-nothings, well, 1850s there were know-nothings, but in 1833 there was a group of people who got together and started a movement to get the Irish out of Lowell. So they were going to attack the Irish immigration camps in front of St. Patrick's Church, and the Irish women loaded their aprons with stones and stood next to the Irish men who threw the stones at the Englishmen as they were trying to get across the bridge and get to St. Patrick's Church and burn it down. And they, as I said, this is according to the Irish Genesis of Lowell, and the Irishmen fought off the Englishmen and won the battle. And the Irish woman stood next to the men the whole time with aprons full of stones, and they just pelted the stones at the Englishmen until the Englishmen all surrendered or left. Most of them left. The support systems that occurred in the 1850s included working with the Know-Nothings, which was a group of Americans who didn't want immigration into America, which might be kind of appropriate for our current time and place. And they didn't want immigrants in America, and they were determined to get the Irish out of America as soon as they possibly could. Bad move because there were so many millions of Irish coming over. They gained power during this period. And the Sisters of Notre Dame had groups of schools that they built around the area, and boys were housed in the boys' school, the girls were housed in the girls' school. And the girls and the boys didn't meet except when they went home to their families. It says in the book From Erin to the Acre by David McKean that the story ends with the Irish woman throwing the Yankee invaders into the canal. And during this time, church properties were extended and a magnificent stone church was built. That would be in 1853, I think. It was the Irish community's way of showing that they were here to stay, and they were. So in I took 3 books. I took the history of Lowell, the Irish Catholic Genesis of Lowell, and From Aaron to the Acre. And the Know-Nothings were anti-Irish and anti-Catholic, as I said. Church properties extended further into the acre, and the acre extended too. The acre became larger and larger and became much more than an acre. It became many acres. In the 1850s, the church was at its zenith, and the Irish men and women were trying to get into the mills to work, and they were having a great deal of difficulty doing it. But after a period of time, some of the mill owners allowed the Irish to get into the mills to work, and found that they were extremely good workers, and that they would work cheaper than the girls who had originally been sought by the manufacturers of the mills. And so they allowed the Irish to work in the mills because they were cheaper. It was a backbreaking type of thing. Acceptance of the Irish was so slowly gaining, but not to the point where the Irish were accepted by the Episcopalians. The Episcopalians had started a District 7 in downtown Lowell, and District 7 had one teacher, just one teacher, and her name was Mrs. Devereaux. And Miss Devereaux, you couldn't be a Mrs. back then because it was the case that the fathers of the educational system didn't want pregnant women to be around children where they could be asked why they were growing so big and how it all happened. And the churches, the St. Anne's Church and the Catholic Church didn't want the kids to know where babies came from. So they told women who got married that they would have to quit teaching. So Miss Devereaux never became Mrs. Somebody. She was always Miss Devereaux. Other groups settled in the acre, and they took over some of the jobs that the Irish had been doing. And the Irish, of course, had been elevating themselves beyond just a few things to do, and they were much more accepted as they slowly gained information and data and memories of what it was that they were doing in the mills in the first place. And the groups settling in the acre along with the Irish were redefining the neighborhood, and the Irish weren't necessarily pleased with it. The Irish had the same problem that the English had when the Irish first appeared, and that they didn't want immigrants to be the reason for the redefinition of the neighborhood. But they couldn't stop the immigration either, and some of the Irish were thrown out of the workforce in place of others from other countries who, like the French and the French Canadians and the Baltic states and other areas, where they were eventually incorporated into the workforce for the mills. In 1831, the church was built, and it was a wooden structure, and it was there until it burned down, which I believe was in the 1850s. And one of the things that happened was that there was a pope who liked Cardinal O'Connell, and O'Connell Park is named after him, and his statue is in O'Connell Park, and they liked the fact that Archbishop O'Connell, Cardinal O'Connell, was asked the Pope to make William O'Brien, the priest, elevated to the rank of Monsignor. Monsignor is a step below bishop. The Irish leadership was at its zenith. In 1889, in the book From Erin to the Acre, the girls' school, the boys' school, Notre Dame Academy, the rectory, the convent, the church, and the home for working girls were all featured in a photograph on page 6, I think. And they had an excellent rapport with the hardworking Irish mothers who kept the checkbook, kept the books for the family. And as I said, in District 7, the public school was open, nobody came. Okay, it was a total embarrassment to the very aggressive educational system in Lowell, and in that none of the Irish came to the District 7 school because it was run by Anglicans and Episcopalians, and they wanted to make sure that their children got their Christian training from Catholics. So anyway, in 1854 was the building of the second church, and this church was made out of stone. St. Patrick's made out of stone, and Archbishop Williams made Father Michael O'Brien the Monsignor. Well, the Cardinal made Michael O'Brien the senior, the Monsignor. But Archbishop Williams helped Michael O'Brien oversee the needs of the Catholic community in Lowell. And this was a time of great building of Catholic churches in Lowell. And some of them were magnificent, like Immaculate Conception, which is a stellar piece now, and has a great many people who still belong to it. And it's one of the wealthiest churches in Lowell. There were 4 Father O'Briens: John, Timothy, Michael, and William. They all died while pastors of the church, and they're all buried in front of the church. And as I said, they used to have a magnificent monument, but now they have a stone. William died in 1922 and was buried with his great-uncles, and they were all his great-uncles. Father John became known for getting his picture on the Father John's medicine bottles, which were made in Lowell, Massachusetts, and continued to be advertised on the side of the Father John's Medicine building until I came here in 1969 and had lived here for 20 years and had seen the Father John's Medicine bottle sign on the side of the building, and had actually seen Father John's Medicine bottles being sold to the public. So it was kind of interesting that Father John's Medicine was probably the best known product that came from Catholic Lowell. Father John was, of course, the first priest in the O'Brien family to come from Ireland, and Father Timothy, Father Michael, and Father William came later. The church, St. Patrick's Church, was built. It was really built as a cathedral. It did not have a bishop attached to it, but they did the best they could to build the church up and make it look absolutely fantastic. And there are pictures that we're going to show you at some point of the fire in 1904 that closed the parish for for probably about a year, as they rebuilt it into what it is now. So I can't tell you any better thing to get than this book, which is From Erin to the Acre, a photo history of Lowell's early Irish, by David Duncan McKean. And David is very active in the church, so he might be able to tell you where to buy this book if it's still available. It's a fantastic book. That's basically it for Lowell Remembers. We'll be back in another month and talk to you about some other aspect of Lowell history. Thank you, and good night.